As a chef, I know flavor doesn't begin in the kitchen. It begins on the land. And Westhome's nature-led Australian Wagyu is a story written in the landscape of Northern Australia. Cooking is storytelling, and Westhome Wagyu carries a story of Northern Australia itself. Raw, powerful, and deeply authentic. It's a testament to the passion and care raised in the rhythm of Northern Australia. I'm Chef Maylin from 88 Club in Los Angeles, and I invite you to visit westhome.com/Maylin to learn more. And taste a story only Westhome nature-led Australian Wagyu can tell. That's westholme.com/MEILIN.
I've never lost money, even on the first issue.
Wow.
I didn't make a lot. I might have made $500, but I was able to pay everything, and bring home just a little bit, and then it grown from there. So, I was going to keep my expenses really low and just make sure that I can handle, and actually make money, and then it's worked.
This is Small Press, Big Ideas, a podcast about the business of local news in the United States. I'm your host, Paul Gewertz. Small Press, Big Ideas is about the opportunities and challenges that local news publishers are facing for their businesses. I'll sit down and talk with journalists, entrepreneurs, nonprofit leaders, and more in the local news industry to find out what's working, what isn't, and how the local news ecosystem can innovate and flourish in the 21st century. All right, today on the podcast, I'm joined by Kirk Kern. He's the owner at Hyperlocal Media in Nevada. Obviously, we were just talking about Las Vegas and been chatting back and forth on LinkedIn for a while. And glad to finally meet you, Kirk. Thanks for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. And I kind of start every podcast the same. This is our first time meeting. So if you could just give myself and the audience a little story about you, your background and your career, and just to kind of set the stage, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, well, I've been doing this for an awful long time. Graduated from college in 1986 in San Diego State University. Always real proud of my Aztecs all the way. I moved to Vegas in 1992 to work for the Las Vegas Review-Journal in the sports section. And I did that in the sports section for a couple of years, but then, and I was just telling the story to one of my people that I'm writing about today. I had a family initially when I was in sports, and that's nights and weekends all the time. And so eventually, I was already married, but we had our son, so I didn't really like the hours as much. So they had a position open for the community editor at the Review-Journal. So I thought, okay, that's a promotion, and it's also, it was more money, which is also always big, but it's also yeah. And this was like 1994. And it was Monday through Friday, like 8 to 5. So, it was much better. Everything was good. So I started doing that. I switched over to this community news section. I really liked, this types of stuff we were doing there. And, it really grew, and from the early, from the mid 90s up until when I left in 2002, we started with 3 monthly publications here in Vegas. And then by the time I left in 2002, we were doing 17 a week.
Wow.
So some of them had grown from monthly to weekly to twice a week, and the rest of them grew from monthlies to weeklies. So that was a really big, growth there in that. And I thought, I saw how that worked, and I knew they were making a lot of money off of them, as a company. Eventually I left and I moved over to our competing entity here, which is a Greenspun Media Group, and they own the afternoon. At the time, it was the afternoon daily, and we were the morning, and they had a JOA. So I moved over to there and I helped them start a weekly business publication. And I did that for 2 years. And then I moved and I, with another guy, started a monthly community lifestyle magazine in this community over here called Summerlin, which is a really great, beautiful master plan community. It was, for like 15 years in a row, it was the largest master plan community in the country, or the fastest growing community master community in the country. So we did that. And then actually Gannett bought that company, from the person that owned it, who was basically my boss. And they moved me and him to Phoenix, where we started like 14 daily, or not daily, but monthly health magazines across the country for Gannett publications. And then we also had the community lifestyle magazines that we did, and we started 7 of those. And, Gannett was an interesting place to work, and it was pretty good for a couple of years. But then eventually I moved on, and with the help of, the guy that had sold the company, I started my own community lifestyle publication in Gilbert, Arizona, and this was like in the mid 2000s, or the early 2000s, like 2004 through 2008. And at that time, the economy was great, and then so Community Lifestyle magazine, it had a lot of luxury type ads. It was a direct mail. It was full color gloss. It was beautiful. And, it was good until it wasn't, and then when the economy went really bad, I lost my cosmetic dentists and my cosmetic surgeons and my car dealers and my, all these all our big advertisers became a challenge. So, so that was my first foray into entrepreneurship. And that was, it worked, like I said, and then it didn't work at all after that. So I went back. My old boss at the Review Journal in Vegas found me down there and brought me back to Vegas. And he had just retired, and he was really ready to retire. So he bought some weekly newspapers in rural counties in Nevada. So he brought me back to run that company. It was called Battleborn Media. So I moved back to Vegas. We started with 3 publications in 3 rural towns weeklies. And we added 2 more, and then we added another one at Spark. So we were up to 6 papers there. And this was from 2011. In 2020, obviously, everybody knows what happened in March of 2020.
Right.
So what happened for me, though, was they decided, okay, we're going to close this Mesquite paper. I'm going to, I helped them sell off this Lincoln County paper. And then they merged 2 of the other ones together. So they were down to just a couple papers. So they didn't really need me to run the company anymore. So then I was kind of out of a job at that point. So I decided after, about a month or so, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. It wasn't like a young guy anymore, so I decided, well, I've done this before, I've, done this on my own before. And there's people in the town called Mesquite, where we did have probably our best paper. The people that live there kept calling me or emailing me and contacting me saying, hey, what happened to our paper? When's it coming back? And I said, well, it's not. It's not coming back. The owners, I'm not there anymore. My staff is all, gone. Everything's gone. So I decided, well, I've done these types of monthly publications before remotely when I worked for Gannett. We had, when I worked for Gannett, we had papers all over the country, or magazines all over the country. So I knew how to do a monthly paper. So, and I wasn't going to move to Mesquite. So I didn't want to do it weekly. And I didn't really have the wherewithal, financially to start a weekly paper and absorb all that cost. So I went back to Mesquite and I started a monthly paper there, which I knew I could do on my own. And I did it. I did it all by myself. I sold all the ads. I wrote all the stories. I did all the layout and all the stuff that I've done. So the only thing I didn't do was I didn't print it, and I didn't do the ads. I didn't do the graphic design on ads. And then obviously the printer, I had a relationship with the Review Journal anyway. I did a lot of business with them when I was with the other company and having worked there all those years. So they were my printer, and then my graphic artist that I used in Arizona and everything else was a freelance graphic artist. She did all my ads. So I was able to put out an issue probably around, I think, September of 2020. It was a monthly pub. I was able to go back and find enough of my advertisers to where my expense was here and my revenue was at least here. So I made a little bit of money, and then, people saw it and they liked it, and I was able to grow that one to, kind of where it is today. I still have that paper, and it goes, and it's running great. So then probably about 2 years ago, my plan was always to come back into Vegas and kind of recreate these community newspapers like I used to do for the RJ, because they stopped doing them probably around 2000. They kind of phased them out, and then they were just completely gone around then. So I knew there was opportunity was here to do those here. Initially, though, like from 2011, 2020, 2021, 2022, I was doing okay with my Mesquite paper. So, I kind of got a little bit lazy and was just kind of living off of that. It was doing fine. But I always knew I wanted to do more, here. So, in 2023, I decided, I just got to do it, so I actually went back with my old company that had laid me off, and I kind of partnered with them to start, our first one here. And it was a community called Sun City Summerlin. So it's 55 and older community over here, 8,000 homes, and all people that read publications. So it was a great demographic for us. And so I helped them start that. And I worked with them, and I still do work with them on that one. And that one was a big success. So once that one became, it was a success right off the bat. So I said, okay, you know what? I just need to just do my plan and just not have any more excuses. So about a year in, I started my own publication, outside of this group in a community called Sky Canyon over here. And I've been doing that one for about a year and a half now, and it's been very successful. I plan next to do another one in this Summerlin community where I've already done like 8 publications or like 4 publications in my life. And so I'm going to start that one pretty soon. And I've targeted maybe about 10 different areas here in town where I can do these community newspapers that are, direct mail publications, free direct mail into, maybe between 5 and 8,000 homes. It certainly fits within a cost frame for me. So I'm not going to lose, I'm not really going out on too much of a limb, financially to do them. And I know they'll work because it worked for me before. So that's kind of where I'm at now. I'm at 2 pubs that I own and 2 others that I kind of help represent. And my plan is hopefully to have maybe 8 to 10 more in the next next 5 years or so. So
very cool. So could you tell me a little bit more? I had written down just a little bit more about Hyperlocal Media, but I'm curious, and I should step back a little bit. I really like that you basically did this for other organizations for years. Like, I'm sure you knew exactly what to come in and do and how to operate and everything. That's a really great, knowledge base to have coming into this. Could you tell me a little bit more about what say each publication looks like? You said it's a newspaper, free direct mail. Is it just a print product? Is there any an online aspect to it? What's the whole thing look like?
I do have an online aspect to it. I don't really monetize it yet. Maybe as it grows. I just don't have the traffic really. So basically, here's kind of what one of them looks like. This is my Sky Canyon paper. It has a gloss cover, and then my inside is high bright newsprint. And on this one, I print 5,000 copies, and I direct mail 4,700. Actually, the printer, which is the Review Journal here, they do all the printing and they label it and then they mail it out. It's through everyday direct mail, basically. So they're putting it out, they drop it off. I don't have to do anything with this one as far as the mailing distribution. They handle the whole thing for me. So that one has 4,700 mailed. I print 5,000, and the rest of them I put in the grocery store for people to pick up. And honestly, they all get picked up. That's a kind of a not too bad of a way to get it out as well. In Sun City Summerlin, it has the exact same look, and it goes out to 8,000 homes. And then in Mesquite, I actually don't direct mail that one. I put that one out on racks. But, Mesquite's kind of a different community where everybody knows to go pick it up. So I print 3,000 of that one. And usually and I put that one out the first Wednesday of the month. And by let's say in a week and a half later, there's none left. They all people know to pick it up. So it's I don't have to direct mail that one. My new one in South Summerlin, it'll be about 6,400 in the mail, and then maybe another 200 or 300 that I'll put out as well. So, and I personally do all the distribution right now as well. So I'm driving up to Mesquite once a month and putting them out on racks, and And then I drop them off, in Sky Canyon. I drive up there and put them out. That one probably only takes me an hour or two. And Mesquite takes me half a day because it takes probably an hour and a half to drive up there. So, but it also, when I go, it's not bad for me to do that because since I don't live in those communities, it gives me a chance to get up there and see what's going on and figure out, some content ideas. So
very cool.
Yeah. So they're all tabloid sized. Most of them have this, like a full gloss cover, and then the inside is kind of like high bright newsprint.
So yeah, it's really cool. I always love it when somebody comes on the podcast. I've had a few people come on and have the print. It's cool having a physical print copy, to look at. I did want to ask, so it's, direct mail, and you said it's targeted at these kind of communities, like these planned communities, which I think there's a lot of in Phoenix and Vegas and places like that from what I understand.
Well, I don't want to do now are just in Vegas.
Okay. Oh, right. Yeah, you were talking about Phoenix before with the Gannett thing, right? Yeah. I don't want to make assumptions, but I'm guessing it's like a slightly older demographic that's reading it too.
In Sun City, Summerlin, it's a 55 and older community, so that's 100% true. In Sky Canyon is more of an up and coming family community. I mean, there are some seniors and retirees there, but I'd say primarily it's mostly younger families that are very active in their lifestyle.
Okay.
It's a really, really close-knit community, though. It's like, and I mentioned this to the people I was interviewing this morning. I said, every time I talk to somebody up here, they always mention, that they all know all of their neighbors in their community. And that's really, and they didn't know their neighbors before they moved there, and like I tell people where I live, I know my next door neighbor. And that's it. He's the only one. I don't know anybody else that lives like within a block and a half of me. So, that's a really good, tight community up there. And they've really kind of, bonded around the publication as kind of their publication. So that's helpful to me, to be able to grow it and keep my advertisers and everything else.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Yeah, and that was kind of what I was leading into with the like the older demographics or family demographics. And you said it sounds like you're making some money with it because the big theme on the show is kind of business model and stuff like that. Like who like what's ringing the cash register? Like who are your advertisers?
In
all across the board. Yeah, sorry.
In most of them, my biggest category is kind of home improvement. Especially in the Sun City area, all the homes there are probably like 20, 25 years old. So they need, new drapes, they need new windows, they need a lot of work. So that's my biggest category in actually all of them. But, home services like plumbers and pest control people and all of those are really good categories for me as well. Realtors are pretty good categories because, people are coming in and out of these places, especially in Sun City. It's 55 and older. So, it's 8,000 homes and there's probably about 50 to 70 homes sold every month, primarily because either people like pass or they have to move into, assisted living or all those other types of things. So there's always kind of churn in a neighborhood like that. In Sky Canyon, and there's still new homes being built in there, which is a little bit rare, but, when people buy a brand new home, there's nothing in there. There's no window coverings. There's no backyard. There's no, all of that. So, when they move there, they're probably from somewhere else. So they don't know who a local plumber is or the pest control guy or the landscaper or anything else. So those are my really good categories. Medical should be a really good category. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Realtors are a good category. And, general retail is always pretty good as well. I should have more restaurants too, but for some reason that's a tough that's a tough one for me to break into.
Yeah, restaurants are famously tough to operate too. So I don't know. I feel like you said, every community is different too. But yeah, no, I was just genuinely curious about that. Kind of the next question, you kind of answered some of it. I was, you have a deep history in this, and now you're doing it for yourself. And I just asked, like how it's actually making money. What advice, like say I'm in a town of 20,000 in Western Colorado with maybe another 25,000 in the surrounding area. So say a community of 40, 50,000. Say I wanted to launch something like this. You've been doing this for years for other people and yourself now. What advice would you give somebody? Like, is it something where you need this industry specific knowledge and like knowing a printer, or do you think somebody could do it if they're motivated enough to do it on their own?
I think you could be if you've been in the industry for at some level, I think that's a plus, and you should be able to have a very, a really good set of skills. I mean, you should be able to do that. I can get away with not having an editor because I can do that. That's what I came up through doing. I wasn't a salesperson ever, but now but that's, if you know your product and you're, passionate about your product, then you can sell it. And then, I've also done the only thing I probably still need help on is like the business end of it, the, billing and kind of accounting and all of those things. But, for the most part, my expenses are very low, or I don't have a lot of expenses, and they're with the same people. So it's easy to keep track of what my costs are, because I have plenty of cost, but it's the same cost with the same 4 or 5 entities. So it's fairly easy to keep track of it. If you're I would say that a town of 20 to 40,000 people, first off, you got to know if there's any competition, and what it is. If there's a weekly paper or a daily paper, that doesn't mean that it's not going to work. My plan is a monthly, publication, which keeps my costs low. And it's, again, I was just talking to someone about this earlier. My cost, I could have started it as a weekly paper when I went back on my own. Even if I lived in the community, I probably wouldn't have done it. But all of a sudden, my weekly cost quadruples, over the course of the month, because, you have a weekly print bill, and you have a weekly graphic artist bill, and you have all of that. And, I wouldn't have the wherewithal to, to make that happen. But, one monthly paper, it's a set amount, and I can sell enough to cover that. And I think it works. It's funny. There are these other types of, like syndicated or franchise type public, groups like this, that will sell you and they actually tried to get me into one of them when I was first starting. They'll sell you like a territory. So let's say I'll buy this one zip code, and then they'll give you the game plan on how to start the magazine. And then they will handle your printing, and they'll handle your mailing, and they'll handle the billing, and they'll handle a lot of the business aspect of it. And all you really have to do is go and sell. But you have to sell a lot before they even let you launch it. And you have to pay them for the area that you're doing. And when I was talking to the person that wanted me to get into that, I said, well, the thing is, I don't need that help, to do any of this. I've done it. I've done all of this stuff before. So I don't need this franchise's support, to do something. And I certainly don't need to pay them, for a certain area, and also you're locked into using their printer, and you're locked into, certain other costs involved. So, I'm glad that I didn't do that. And I think that there's probably a lot of people that were kind of in my boat, with that had their job kind of taken away from them. And I think that there's a lot of people that have the skill set to do what I do, but it's hard. It's especially if you've never sold ads before. That, and if you came up die hard through the editorial system, you stayed away from that as much as possible. So you may have kind of a bad taste in your mouth about ad sales. So you kind of have to kind of swallow your pride a little bit to be able to do this. But it is viable. I think that with the two that I own and the two that I help with, and the third and the next one that I'm helping somebody else with, they've all been viable and they've all made money. They could probably make more. They could probably do more. If I was a better salesperson, they could make more. Serviceable salesperson.
That's a theme on this show. Is I have people at bigger like local news organizations and like startups, for lack of a better term, I guess. Like an individual person, and a lot of people that came up are very mission driven, or like journalists, and then they have to wear this business hat too. And it's like it's definitely a friction I've seen with other guests on the show too. It's like, just in the market these days, you have to be able to wear all those hats and everything. I'm lucky with my business. When you were talking earlier about the kind of, you didn't say boring stuff, but that's how I consider it. Accounting, all that stuff. I'm super lucky because my wife has a finance degree and was an accountant for years. So she gets to I have free labor for all that. I'm very, very spoiled with that.
Nice.
But I agree that is a challenge for me and a lot of other folks out there too. You said that, you came up on the editorial side. You don't need to hire an editor. Maybe you said this, but like, how are you still writing everything? Do you have any freelance people? How's that side looking?
In Mesquite, I have a regular freelancer that does basically all my articles for me there. In Sky Canyon, I still do, the bulk of the writing, but I have some contributors that fill out some of the inside pages. Again, and they're all really hyperlocal products, so there's no real carryover between one publication and another. Maybe now that in Vegas, I have a couple of, I have a person that writes kind of a family oriented article. And then I have another one that does kind of a holistic type article that's maybe not completely, zoned for that one edition, although one of them lives specifically in the community. So there's a little bit of stories that I might be able to cross over. But once, when I get my next one going, I'll probably need at least another freelancer or two to do that. And when I get at least maybe that's my last one before I actually need to have someone that can produce some, do the InDesign work and actually produce like all of them. And then I can move on and start the next one and have that. But right now I have my freelance graphic artist who does my ads and my cover. And then I have one freelancer that does a lot of the writing in Mesquite. And then, I have like the mayor writes a column, and I have, I have a few people that contribute. I have a religion column, and I have a financial guy that lives in the area. He writes a column, so, I have a little bit of that, and I have a big events calendar. So I run a lot of stuff, just stuff going on in the community. So that's pretty much the majority of the pub. And then in Sky Canyon, it's kind of the same. But right now I'm doing the articles. But when I get my next one going, I'll probably have to farm that writing out to someone else. And, eventually I'll need, eventually I will need an editor to, again, put it all together, maybe write some of it, and also, get all the other work, coordinate the rest of the editorial, and also to produce it. The InDesign, the page design work, and then, but I think I probably have maybe one more in me before I get to that point, because they're all, my deadlines are kind of spread out.
I see. Very cool. So I had a question here on AI because it's 2026 and everybody has to talk about AI on everything. AI isn't coming for local print newspapers, I don't think. You know what I mean? It's not going to replace being in the community and stuff like that. But I'm curious, maybe your thoughts on it, and if you're using anything to speed stuff up or anything like that, or if you're using it at all. Yeah.
You're right, because the articles that I'm writing are not articles that can be gleaned from other sources.
Right.
So an AI person, I can't just say, hey, I need this article about this kid that won the state track or cross country title. I have to go and write that.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I do at the end, and I copy at it, I run it through my own spell check, and I do everything else. But recently I've been dropping it in and saying, hey, I'll drop it into ChatGPT and say, do a copy edit on this for me. And honestly, it's not really changing too much, but maybe it'll clean up a little bit of something here or there. But that's really the only thing I use it for at this point.
Okay, cool.
But it's after I've already done my initial copy edit and gone from there. So I feel I'm a pretty good writer, so I don't really need a lot of editing.
It is helpful for some stuff like that, like check my grammar here, etc.
Yeah,
for myself, for my purposes and stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, agreed. So I've been asking everybody this one. Flash forward 5 years. You kind of talked a few times about your projections. Where do you see Hyperlocal Media Nevada? Like, if everything goes the way you're planning, trajectory stays the same, and everything. Like, what's your kind of vision for it a few years down the line?
5 years down the road, and I'm not like a young guy, so 5 years down the road would put me, like 67. But I don't feel that I'm going to be, I don't feel like an old 67 to where I really want to retire. And I like what I do, so that's not really something that I'm really planning on doing. But 5 years down the road, I would like to have 10 publications, in all over here. And if I'm doing 10 publications, I'm making decent money. I'm making actually pretty good. Although I will have to have a staff by then. So it's not fun, to manage staff. That's probably the worst thing to want to do. Which is, luckily, I don't really have to do that at this point. But at that point, if I'm 10 publications in, I probably have at least 3 full-time staffers to help produce everything I do, and but still have a good viable products and just really kind of build this up. My envision 20 at some point, but I think 10 would be a really good, comfortable number. Vegas it's not a big town, but it's not really small either. So I'd like to keep my pubs kind of, along this one little corridor of that's why they're called, my little logo is 215 News. That's kind of the beltway that kind of wraps around the whole town. So I have a paper here at 215, so I want these papers that kind of all wrap around this 215. That's what it's branded as. So, I feel I can find 10 solid communities that I could produce little papers, little monthly newspapers for, all direct mail, all about between 5,000 and 8,000 distribution, and just have a good little media empire in Vegas. Because actually, at this point, no one's doing specifically what I'm doing. Like I said, there's a couple of these magazine groups there's probably about 7 or 8 of these little community lifestyle magazines that, they're monthly direct mail and they have editorial in them, but they're very different than what I try to do. So I think my niche is that I know how to do community news a lot better than what these people are trying to do. So I feel I can handle. I can handle.
Yeah, it. When you were talking about that model before, the kind of franchise model, the analogy that always comes up for me is my parents owned restaurants growing up. They started with a hot dog stand, then they had a hamburger place, and eventually had like a small restaurant. And so they kind of grinded it out, however you say it, for years. My friend in town here, him and his wife saved up money and they opened a Jimmy John's franchise. And everything was just done for them, but they're still kind of like beholden to this bigger entity.
Yeah.
But, everything's dialed in and everything. You kind of have the benefit of having that experience to have that all, set up there and everything and know how to do things and everything. So you're well set up for it. And
it's
I'm
just
rooting for you.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that's a good or bad, because I know that the one person I had initially talked with, she started her thing right in COVID. Same story. She was kind of laid off from her. She had a TV news kind of sales. She was a salesperson, which made it even better for her. She had a sales job at a news station. She was let go during COVID, and she went and bought this franchise. She bought the franchise and started it, and it was huge, and it's been very successful for her. And then she actually moved and worked with the corporate side of their company. So it did work for her, but I've seen a lot of them that, sometimes they never get off the ground because they won't let you even launch it until you reach a certain revenue. And so I like with Sky Canyon, when I started it, my plan was to do 4,300 in the mail and print 5,000, but my sales started slow. So what I did, I pivoted from there and I just said, I'm going to print 1,000 copies and I'm going to charge really, really cheap rates. And I'm just going to put it out in the grocery stores and all the shops there for people to pick up. And that really worked for me, because then when I told everybody, okay, in 3 months, I'm going to bump up my distribution and it's going to cost this amount. So everybody knew that, but it helped me get a lot more people because I actually had the physical product, to go out and show. I can show people, oh, this is it, and in 2 months, it's going to be direct mail into everybody's homes. And so I was able to grow it quickly like that, because it's hard to sell something that doesn't exist, so I was, so I was able to pivot that way. Whereas, these other groups, if you're going to, you're locked into their 4,000 printing or 5,000 printing, and you have to have, let's say, 8,000 of revenue before they let you even launch it. And if you don't get to that number, you can't launch it, and so, you don't have the actual product to show someone, you show them as a different, oh, this is the one we do in this other community, which sometimes, which might work, but it's still better, I think, the way I did it, where I could actually show people the truth, the way it's actually going to be, and then, and then go on from there. And then once I was able to get my mailing going on, then it really took off, because then people actually got it in their homes and said, well, I should advertise in this. So I got enough to really get me going. And then when it actually hit people's homes, then I started really getting calls.
Yep. It's hard to sell something that doesn't exist. That's a good clip from this kind of episode. That's good. Kirk, that's all the questions I had. This has been fascinating. I haven't had anybody quite doing the same thing as this, so it's really interesting to me, and that you're making it work and everything.
Yeah, I think, it totally does work. And, like I said, I'm in the Sun City, Mesquite, Sky Canyon, those three right off the bat, I've never lost money, even on the first issue.
Wow.
I didn't make a lot. I might have made $500, but I was able to pay everything, and bring home just a little bit, and then it grown from there. So
very cool.
It's not something that you have to, like, for me, I didn't have a nest egg to live off of. So, when I started it, I made sure that, I was going to keep my expenses really low and just make sure that I can handle, and actually make money, and it's worked.
And make sure it's not a money pit too, which, sometimes.
Yeah. And that's why, like, with a weekly,
right,
it totally would have been a money pit,
right.
But, with a monthly, it's totally doable,
Very cool.
But any community can do what I'm doing, even if you have a competing weekly or a daily, you just do different type of content, and you just make it, so as long as it's interesting and direct and free direct mail, it'll work.
Very cool. This is awesome. Kirk, this is great. Can you tell people where to find you online? I can link to it in the show notes and everything. Or how anything else? You found me
on LinkedIn at Kirk Kern. It's the same on Facebook. My website that I just got going for hyperlocalmedianv.com. That's kind of new. It's actually pretty nice. I'm kind of liking that one. And then for teennews.com is what we have for my Vegas publications, and then mesquitelocalnews.com for Mesquite. So there, cool. But the hyperlocalmedianv.com kind of will direct you to any of the ones that I do.
Yep, I just pulled it up on my other screen, and yeah, very, very cool looking. Yeah, I'll make sure to link to that so people can just click and go check it out. Kirk, thank you so much. This is great meeting you. Cool story. Rooting for you, and I'll have you back on when you're.
Make sure that I go back and watch all of the other 80 interviews that you've done, just to see kind of how they've, how my story is either similar or different.
Yeah, I hope so. Mm-hmm. You'll hear my voice a whole lot and hear me say the same things over and over again, probably. But the other people are very interesting. All right, that's Kirk. You have a great day. Thanks for joining me.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for listening to Small Press Big Ideas. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to help the show, the best thing you can do is to tell a friend or colleague and just take a few minutes to leave a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to right now. It only takes a minute out of your day, but it really does help the podcast grow and reach more ears. Check back for new episodes every Monday.